So I'm going to share with you a little bit of kind of like a recap on Nehemiah and the type of leadership that we see in him as an individual. That's what we've been working through over the last number of weeks. But I'm going to make it a little bit of a connecting point to Jesus today. Because one of the things that you might feel as you work through an Old Testament book of the Bible is we're Christians, right? We follow the life of Jesus. And sometimes there might be a little bit of a gap between, okay, I know that this is a historical story grounded in reality that shows what happened when Nehemiah, a government employee for the king of Syria, ended up making a decision that he was going to work to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Now, what does that have to do with us here today? Well, what I want to be able to put out in front of you is something that I've actually been very excited to share, but have held back for the last while. We have again and again looked at this timeline, right, of the exile. So it's a timeline that shows what was actually going on in the world at the time of Nehemiah. And when we're looking at this, we have these years and these dates. These wouldn't have been dates that the people at that time were necessarily thinking about, but this is the one real point I want to try and get across this morning, is that in 586, Jerusalem fell to Babylon. The city was destroyed, it was ransacked, and the people that lived there were taken away. They were taken to far-off lands. Many of them died, many of them were mistreated, sold, they were slaves. After a period of time, Babylon ended up being conquered by Persia. Then, after that, there was an opportunity for some of the exiles of Judah to actually return to their home city, to Jerusalem. There were different people that are biblical characters you can read about, like Haggai and Zechariah, who had a role. And they eventually came to a point where they restored the temple, which was the worshiping place for the people of Israel. In 458, there was a second return of exiles led by a priest whose name was Ezra. He brought more people back. And understand, when I say brought people back, this is a 1,000-mile journey that took them maybe many, many months to return from places that were in Persia that these people had been dispersed to. Then we get to the year 444, and this is where the book of Nehemiah picks up with the story of Nehemiah, who longs to be able to return and actually do the work that he feels God has given him to restore the city. This is my point that I want to get across to you. 444 is not just a year, it is a countdown. In 444 years, the most important event in the history of humanity is going to happen. We now orient all of our dating around that point in history because of how much gravity of impact it has had upon the known world. That event is the coming of Jesus Christ. And what I need you to understand is that without Nehemiah, without God working within this person to rebuild the city of Jerusalem, it would have remained in ruins. It would not have had the walls or the economy going on around it. It would not have had the temple, which is the setting for the entire New Testament. So when you are looking at the Gospels specifically, so when you are reading something within Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you are hearing about the city where Jesus is born, that city would most likely not have been populated in the way that it was if it was not for Nehemiah. The city was in ruins. It was empty. There was not a whole lot going on in that area. There was no ability to move forward with a nation of Judah. But because the walls were put in place, the foreign powers were held at bay, and there was an opportunity for the people to begin to really press in and become the people of God. 444 years in preparation for a birthday party, right? But that's what Nehemiah was doing. He was working not just for himself or for the people that were right there, but God was using him to begin to prepare for the life that was to come, the life that would change everything. And so Nehemiah was rebuilding walls, but it was Jesus who would come and would rebuild hearts. Nehemiah was gathering a nation of people, but Jesus was going to come and invite the world. That's what we're reading about here. And sometimes we might get those two things separate, but what I need you to understand is that Nehemiah is this profound example of a leader who actually is pointing us and preparing the whole world, Jerusalem specifically, for the coming of Jesus. That is a big deal. And so when you look at Jesus and you look at Nehemiah, today as we're celebrating fathers and we're thinking about people who have been examples for us, what I want you to know is that one of the best things that we can do is live like Nehemiah and also live like Jesus Christ to be able to try and hit whatever target we're going after. So here are a couple really quick points for you about Nehemiah and his example that we've read through so far. Nehemiah begins with himself. We read a passage in chapter 1 about the fact that he actually is brokenhearted when he hears about the destruction of the city of Jerusalem. I want to read just that section with you really, really briefly, and then we're going to have the opportunity to do a little participation together. So in Nehemiah chapter 1, it says this. Let me jump up there. In Nehemiah chapter 1, he hears about the falling of the city of Jerusalem, and he says this: "They said to me, 'Those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire.' When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven." And then it continues. "Then I said," this is his actual prayer, "'The Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments, let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's family, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly toward you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws you gave your servant Moses." Now, jump back over to the slide that shows the example of Nehemiah. What I want you to understand is that Nehemiah is not Jesus. Nehemiah is not a perfect person. But what Nehemiah is he is a person who, from the very beginning of his book all the way through everything that we've been reading, we're up to chapter 9 now, he is a person who is humble before God and who's willing to own the fact that he's made mistakes, that he's got problems, that he needs help, right? And the crazy thing is that he is profoundly used because he doesn't try harder and harder and harder to be able to hit the target. Instead, he positions himself to receive. He positions himself before God and says, I know that I too have things that I have to confess. He's able to say, I'm sorry. He's able to own it. And that is the place that any leadership must begin, because it allows us to be humble and dependent on God and then to have the courage to take action. I put on here that he cares enough. He cares enough to risk. He cares enough to feel. He cares enough to notice what's going on. And I think for many of us, we would say, you know what? Well, I care. I care about the fact that, that there's violence within our cities. I do care about the current, political situation. I care about, people who don't have food. But do you care enough? Do you care to the point where it actually tips you into a point of discomfort and tips you into a point of actually taking action? Nehemiah cared enough, and so did Jesus. So did God. He cared enough, not just to say, oh, I'm bummed about that, or, oh, let's send a text message, prayers and thoughts. No, Jesus came in the person of God and then entered into our world, into our neighborhood, and got to work. He cares enough to actually move and be a part of our lives. That's what you've got to ask yourself. Do I care enough? Can't care about everything. We know that. But do we care enough? And then he prays and he acts. We see this again and again. He combines his spirituality with his action. There are too many of us, I think, within the Christian life who are willing to pray but not willing to act, or those of us who act without ever praying. That combo doesn't work We have to be the people who have both a left foot and a right foot. And he leads with others. I think this could be one of the greatest challenges that is facing men today, but also many, many Christians, is that we want to lead. We might even have things that we're excited about, but we're doing it in isolation. We are not allowing ourselves to actually foster some of the community that I think you heard James talking about with his uncle, that we are sitting back and we are prioritizing relationships with other people and community in a way that jettisons us forward. We have a team. If we don't have that, we don't stick in the same way. And I think one of the unique reasons for that is that for men in particular, our jobs don't require us to have friendships. And sometimes our families don't require us to have friendships. And so there isn't an expectation that is constantly being, peppered at us that these would be a high, priority. But after a time, our lives are diminished because we haven't actually fostered that type of intentional relationship that can feed us in the small seasons. And then lastly, he builds. Nehemiah builds. He doesn't just build walls. You see him building into people. You see him empowering and saying, will you join me in this work? He builds into others. If you look, Nehemiah has a whole chapter where he talks about the fact that he invited hundreds of people to come and eat at his table as the governor every single day for years. He was building relationships. He was having to spend time with these people. He eventually puts his brother in charge of the city of Jerusalem. He doesn't do it himself. He puts his brother in charge. He's building up others. He's saying, you and your families need to defend this portion of the wall. He didn't run himself ragged trying to do all the work himself. He builds and he says, you've got to build. He puts responsibility on others. But he does so with encouragement. When he sees other people being torn down, when there's certain officials that are taking advantage of other people within the city of Jerusalem, he stands up for them. He says, no more. You're not going to do this. This isn't good. And that is what we see within the person of Jesus. Every single one of these, you can say, is also true of Jesus. Even though he was God, he prayed and then he acted. He was always in touch with his Father. He was somebody who leads with others. Jesus didn't have to invite anybody along for the ride, but he did. And they slowed him down. Those disciples were constantly being like, Jesus, what? What did you say? Can you explain that again? But he invited them along, and he invites all of us along into his mission. And he builds. Every day he is working, building, trying to craft us and create us, not only as individuals, but collectively as a people, to be his witnesses in the world. So we don't have a whole lot more time to necessarily be able to dive into all this. But what I want you to be able to hear from me is that we live in a world that's constantly going to be moving the target. It's constantly going to be redefining it. Sometimes they're going to put you at the back of the room, and it doesn't matter how hard you throw. That ball that you've got doesn't have enough weight to get there, right? And you might work for a tech company for a whole bunch of years, and you were told, hey, you know what? If you know how to program and if you know how to do this, you're guaranteed a job. And suddenly the world changes, and AI completely strips your profession, and you've got to figure out what to do because the goal you were shooting towards isn't there anymore. And there's 1,000 other changes like that happen within our lives. And what we can do in that situation, in that place, is not try harder, not throw even more fiercely or push ourselves in terms of skill. It's in those points when we need to look to the examples of people around us, humans who have wrestled and struggled and are figuring it out. We need to look to some of their examples. And we need to look to the examples that are given to us within the Bible and the example of Jesus. And that's where we can find a sense of what the target is that we should be shooting for. So what I want to do to kind of close out is I want to encourage you to take a little bit of time with those cards that are on your seat to be able to write down what an encouraging word to someone, specifically a man within your life, who has lived in such a way that it's given you a little bit of a sense of where your goal is. They've influenced you, they've impacted you, they've been an encouragement to you. That's what I want you to be able to do. I'm going to give you a little bit of time right now to get that started, and then I'm actually inviting the worship team up, and they're going to sing the last song. You probably won't have the time right now to write the whole thing. Otherwise, we might be here for 10, 15 minutes, or for some of you, 30. But what we will have is I want you to take just a moment to be able to think, to begin writing that down, and then we're going to sing this last song about the goodness of God and the fact that God, knowing that sometimes even the best fathers can't provide us with all that we need, he positioned himself as father and came into this world to be able to give us an example of the target and goal that we need to be able to shoot at. So I want you to take a little bit of time right now. Go ahead and just think, who is the person and what's maybe a word that you would want to share with them? So do that right now, and then we'll begin to sing in just a minute.